Okay, let's ask the question, because it's a key feature for those of you who wish to read this and write on it. Why is it as long as it is, this text? And second of all, how do we know these kinds of things? Well, let's answer the first question. Why is it as long as it is? It's a 70-page text in part because Trigger wants to lay out in very detailed fashion all the evidence, sparse, small, limited as it may be, that enables us to make these kinds of claims. And so you'll frequently find several pages spent discussing one site or another site and working through the implications of that. Unless you're particularly interested, you can feel free to skip that because it's not particularly relevant. You can take it from me. Trigger's reputation is well established, and the evidentiary basis for which he makes the claims that he does, I think we can take as solid. The second point, how do we know these things? If you don't have any direct evidence, if no one wrote down what they did when they met, anything like that, how can we infer, how can we reconstruct what this life would have looked like? That's a very challenging question. And if you're an archaeologist, it's very frustrating because, of course, you're talking about pre-literate people who left no formal record of their existence. So a key element in being able to reconstruct the story, and we see it referenced here on page 112, if you don't mind, is essentially the garbage that people left behind them. Garbage tells us a lot about who people are, who they are. And by garbage, it doesn't mean the food you throw away, but the remnants of your civilization. And particularly important in this case are different types of pottery that attach to different settlements that are found. So when archaeologists went out, you dig it up, you find little bits of pottery here and there. The idea is you get these pieces of pottery, what can they tell you about the society that was there? And we're helped by what seems to be a universal human behavior, which is when human beings made pottery, maybe it's the soft nature of the clay or something, we like to decorate it. We put our thumbs in it, or we make little designs on it or something. It just goes with the territory. If you make pottery, you're going to decorate it in some way. It doesn't have to be very complex decoration, but somehow, for whatever reason, we're always drawn to decorate our property. And so what we can get from this is that the decoration of the things that we make refer back to the culture that makes it. Because once we've established a way of decorating stuff, we tend to replicate it when we make other stuff. So that our pots look the same. You know this yourself. You at home, you have a set of china, right? All looks the same. You put it out, it looks nice. That instinct, it turns out, is apparently very, very old. So one of the things that we can conclude when we look at different types of pottery, we can make some conclusions, or at least some tentative conclusions, about where that pottery came from. So if you look at, say, for example, two different sites around the same period of time, and we find that the pottery that's left between those two sites is totally distinct, we can assume, therefore, that there were very limited connections between them. On the other hand, if we find pottery types that are similar, it suggests, at a most basic level, that there was some kind of an interaction. But actually, we can go further than that, because when we find similar types of pottery, we can ask the question, who makes the pottery? And pottery is traditionally made by women. Why that should be, I don't know, but there we go. Potters are traditionally female, presumably because it was linked to food preparation, which was a female task inside these kinds of societies. So when we find, for example, two sites that are relatively close by, and there are similarities in the pottery types, what it tells us is that women are crossing across that boundary. That is to say, there is a form of partner sharing in which women are moving from one location to another location. Similarly, if we find two sites that are next to each other and the pottery is not the same, we can either conclude that there is no contact between them, or that the partners that are being exchanged across that boundary are not women, but are men, because men do not make pottery. As you can see, as he says in this discussion, pottery types appear to be much more homogeneously distributed through this region than stone tool types, etc. So we have some things made by men, some things made by women. We can look at the homogeneity of the distribution, and based on what we can see, we can make some conclusions. And one of the interesting conclusions we can make, and it will not sound very interesting at the moment, but it actually is quite a lot of importance, is who goes where. So if you imagine two people get together and you're exchanging partners across this boundary, men and women are connecting. Does the wife go to live in the tribe of her husband, or does the husband move into the tribe of his wife, right? This is what's known as patrilocality, which is you move to the place of the man, or matrilocality, you move to the place of the woman, of the mother, right? And so we can make some inferences about whether we're looking at a patrilocal or a matrilocal society based on the distribution or the homogeneity, of distributed goods around people. That's what is coming out in this chapter. You can imagine that when you've got small little bits and pieces and you're trying to establish or convince your readers of this, it's going to take some time to walk through the evidence. That's one of the reasons why this chapter is so long. As he says, by way of summarizing better than I have here, he says in patrilineal bands, meaning groups of people where women move in with their husbands, we're engaging in exogamic marriages, meaning marriages from outside of the tribe. The diffusion of female potters would result in the widespread distribution of similar elements of ceramic design, meaning that the women who were making the pottery would be moving from this tribe to that tribe to that tribe, and they would be reproducing those pottery types all over the place. Whereas if you don't see that, you can then assume either that there is no interaction, or more probably that it is not a patrilineal but a matrilineal. Men are moving in with their wives, and so the pottery types remain distinct. Okay, I'm emphasizing all that simply by way of noting the difficulty that it is in reconstructing, but also to point out that it introduces us to these two concepts of a male or a female derived lineage. And we'll come back to that in a moment, because it's going to matter a little bit to our discussion.